Twitch has accepted the stream. YouTube has accepted the stream. Facebook has accepted the stream. The backup recording device has accepted the stream. Are you ready to begin your show?
I am ready.
Okay, when it says on the air, you're on the air, okay?
Okay, thank you. Hello, Think Twice Radio. I'm the Muckraker Punk, and this is the Muckraker Punk's Therapy. So thank you for tuning in to today's episode. So today's episode, we're going to do an audit. This is an audit of the City of Buffalo's affordable housing. So you can read along at muckrakerpunk.net/bash, B-A-S-H, if you'd like to read along or watch any of the clips that I've curated in today's mental health therapy session. So let's get started. Also, I want to announce that if you go to my website, muckrakerpunk.net, I do have a Patreon. So I just started a Patreon, and I think I finally feel comfortable that I've put in enough work and continue to put in work to beg for money on the internet. So I think the internet, it not only has it disabled, local news and really gutted, our local coverage, but it's turned us all into gypsies on the internet. So if you'd put $5 a month, a subscription, that'll get you more muck. Because right now I'm about ankle deep into the muck. But with your support, I could get maybe knee deep, and maybe eventually I could get up to my eyeballs in muck, because there's a lot of muck. And your support would be greatly appreciated. So if you subscribe to my Patreon, I will send you an email every Monday. So Muck Mondays, I'll send some more muck, because in the process of making these shows, kind of what you don't see is my research process. So there's lots of information and good content that I encounter that I'll curate in a newsletter and send out more, and also give out some of my thoughts to maybe help people get prepped for the Tuesday Common Council meeting. So that's my Patreon, and that's the last time I'll ask for money in today's show. So again, muckrakerpunk.net/bash. So I do want to bring to people's attention, if you're tuning in for the first time or not seeing my shows, last week I recorded my second mental health therapy session called Trouble in the Hen House, where I audited the City of Buffalo's new police collective bargaining agreement. So I kind of went deep last week into the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority, in the Buffalo Police Union and the mayor, and kind of the process that, if you can call it a process, went into creating a new police contract. Now, essentially, the too long to watch, or the high-level summary, is that the Common Council really hastily approved a new police contract that everyone's acknowledged has a $5 to $25 million hole in it. So they essentially approved a plan that they can't afford. So if you'd like to go deep, you can go to my website, muckrakerpunk.net/henhouse, and that episode is on there. So that's the police CB day. But in today's episode, we're just going to audit the City of Buffalo affordable housing. So let's get into it. So first, let's get our Muckraker warm-up in. So let's learn our Muckraker's alphabet. So in today's episode, there's in the process of muckraking and auditing, they love to use acronyms that spell short words, acronyms that also are just 3 to 4 letters that don't make sense. So to be a good muckraker, a big auditor, you kind of got to know the lingo. So let's go over some of our muckraker alphabets that will make this whole episode and maybe your following of affordable housing easier. So the first one is AHTF. So this is the Affordable Housing Task Force. It's also commonly called just the Task Force. So AHTF, Affordable Housing Task Force. The next one is BASH, B-A-S-H, the Buffalo Affordable and Safe Housing Initiative. So this is an initiative that the Common Council made that was kind of a result of the AHTF. So the AHTF then led into the BASH, or the BASH. So kind of an example of an acronym that then doesn't make any sense, and another acronym that makes, I guess, a catchy or a short phrase, BASH. Some more technical terms too are PRI, so proactive rental inspection. So as we get into the episode, one of the policy recommendations for the Affordable Housing Task Force was kind of building up the city's proactive rental inspection. So now, based on my understanding of how the city works, right now the city doesn't proactively inspect rentals. Really only once someone, either a tenant or a landlord or neighbor, complains, then they'll go out and inspect a property. So part of the Affordable Housing Task Force policy reports was proactive rental inspection, so PRI. And then STR, short-term rentals. So that's a term we'll see later on in some of the policies that was proposed by the Common Council. But STR, short-term rental, think of this as like an Airbnb of essentially people having a house that they rent out to not tenants, but almost visitors. And we all know what Airbnb is. So STR is another term that we'll see. So that's our Muckraker's alphabet. Hopefully, now you know your, I guess not your ABCs, your AHTFs. So let's first start. So today's episode, we're going to cover the Affordable Housing Task Force, then the Buffalo Affordable Safe Housing Initiative, and then at the end, I'll get into a little bit of my own personal audit work. So let's start with the Affordable Housing Task Force. So a little background on the AHTF Task Force. So the main objective of the Affordable Housing Task Force, it was to conduct a thorough analysis of the issues of affordable housing and tenants' rights in the city of Buffalo, and to produce a written report with recommendations on how the Buffalo Common Council can effectively address the issue of affordable housing. So through legislation and other policy measures. So effectively, the Common Council set up this task force to come up with recommendations for the Common Council to either legislation or policy measures. So essentially, they kind of outsource their job to this task force, which is creating legislation. So a little timeline. So this goes back to January 2023. So on January 10th, 2023, so it's been over a year now, as I record today's January 30th, 2024. So over a year ago, the Common Council adopted a resolution titled Pridgen, Darius Pridgen, the Ellicott Council member, submitted this, the creation of the City of Buffalo Affordable Housing Task Force. So this called on the council staff to publicize a call to residents and community organizations to apply for memberships on the task force. So the goals and responsibilities that the Common Council drew up. So it was expected to meet monthly at a minimum and be responsible for providing residents with the opportunity to participate so that the goals could be achieved. So the goals of the task force that it was set up to do was to clearly outline what issues are state level policies and what issues are municipal level policy, and then provide recommendations to the council on all municipal level policies supported by data-driven research. So I guess the way government works is there's the city, which is, a government entity, and then there's the state, and there's the federal government, and each of those different layers of government have different, policy powers and responsibilities. So the part of the task force was to kind of suss out what responsibilities the council has itself, and then which ones it doesn't have. So once the task force filed their report, they will present their findings to the Buffalo Common Council, and then the council will make a determination based on the findings and dissolve the task force. So essentially, in summary, the Common Council set up this task force to kind of do their dirty work and come up with policy recommendations for affordable housing. So the next issue, so once we had this goal, the next thing was to, bring on members. So a big kind of point of contention was who was going to be on this task force. So they set it up so that there'd be 9 voting members who all fall under the following criteria. So in order to be a member of the task force, you had to be a resident of the city of Buffalo for 1 year, be at least 18 years of age. 3 members of the task force would be from organizations that focus on tenant rights. 3 members would be from landlord and business rights. You'd have 1 member of the city's Fair Housing Office or the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, 1 member of the city's law department, and 1 community member who has been personally affected by the lack of affordable housing option within the city and who is not affiliated with a particular organization. So it was hoped that the makeup would reflect the city's diversity, including but not limited to age, race, creed, color, origin, identity, sexual orientation, disability, marital status, and socioeconomic standing. So that was the first thing they did was that the Common Council set up this task force and, the criteria for members. So then in February 2023, so a month later, the task force was appointed. So On February 7th, 2023, the Common Council appointed members of the task force. So while the task force was originally supposed to be 9 voting members that I just read out, after receiving many well-qualified and interested applicants, the task force ended up being 11 voting members. So the following members were appointed to the housing task force. So you had 2 elected co-chairs. You had Athena Cyrus, who was an individual capacity, and Christopher Shinta, an individual capacity. And then you had other members were Divya Tandon, and I'm sorry if I say any of these names wrong. I probably am. Western, who was a property owner. Edwin Jackson from the Buffalo Urban League. Harold Cardwell, who's the City of Buffalo's fair housing officer. I think he works for the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency. Heather Abraham, who's another individual. And then you had a representative from a developer. So Sinatra and Company had a representative named Matt Connors. Michaela Shapiro Shelaby, who was for Push, which is like a tenants-based or a housing organization here in Buffalo. Sarah Wooden from the Partnership for the Public Good. And then Stephen Hagsma from Home Opportunities Made Equal, so another kind of housing organization. So those were the members of the task force. So once, the task force had a goal and they had members, the next part that they had to work on was creating the report and holding public meetings. So the Affordable Housing Task Force in 2023, they held 2 public meetings. So they held a public meeting in June at the Central Library. You can see an advertisement here. So they advertised for the public to get public input. So you can meet the task force members and share your experience related with housing or affordable housing in the city. And again, it's kind of saying, okay, this is the task force that's set up by the Common Council to provide policy recommendations. So this is an advertisement for the one in June. There was also a second task force meeting held August 17th at the Frank Merriweather Junior Library. So they had 2 public meetings to help kind of inform their report. So here are some of the public comments that, so in the Affordable Housing Task Force, which we'll get into, that's the next item here. There's a section where the task force summarized the public comments. And I think something I've observed in the city of Buffalo, just being around, is, the public really never gets to comment on anything important. They're kind of, and we'll see later in this episode how the public was kind of kept in the dark in this whole process. But I think the public comments that were summarized in the Affordable Housing Task Force report are a good kind of maybe summary of how the public's feeling, because this is a really contentious issue in the city of Buffalo. We have rising population here, and the housing stock is continuing to deteriorate. We have one of the oldest housing stocks in the country. Lots of houses are over 100 years old. So you have a housing stock, and the city is engaged in a process, and kind of the de facto policy of the city has been to just demolish houses and then keep them vacant lots, and the city owns lots of vacant lots. So now we kind of have a housing shortage that is, led to rising rents. And so here's some of the public comments. So the task force report broke it up into a couple different kind of buckets of what the public was concerned about. So historical context, affordable housing and landlord-tenant relations, homelessness and shelter solutions, housing development and repair, and access to service and government response were kind of the buckets of what the public comments were according to the task force report. So historical context. So one of the issues was the racial segregation. So for those of you who may or may not know, the city of Buffalo is highly segregated. Mostly, if you look at kind of a map right on Main Street, you kind of have the east side, which a lot of residents of color live, and then you have kind of on the other side of Main Street, you have lots of whites, and then also there's pockets on the lower west side, Hispanic population. So we're very, very racially segregated, and a lot of the comments were kind of aimed at just the history that's in the housing stock and in just our city's history. The other was the ARPA funds in council, in the council. So, and I've mentioned this before, the city of Buffalo got over $300 million from the federal government for the American Rescue Plan. So ARPA, ARPA, another Muckraker alphabet term, So a lot of I think they just announced, I think today, a story in the investigative poster of the Buffalo News that the city finally announced that they're going to give, I think, $19 million to community groups. So I think when the initial promise came out, they promised, community organizations would get 100 million plus, and that's slowly been small. So a lot of concerns is we got all this money from the federal government that's just been sitting in a bank account collecting interest. And then also the council efficacy. So the public commented, and I think rightfully so, that they were kind of suspicious of this task force, and that this task force, it was set up just to kind of give the council a good look. And I think a lot of people in these public comments were kind of suspicious that this wasn't going to lead to anything. And we'll see how this kind of turns out towards the end of the show. So affordable housing, landlord-tenant relations. So obviously with housing, we have lots of renters, and obviously when you have a renter situation, you have a landlord and you have a tenant. So that was a big point of contention in the public comment. So there was diverse views on affordability. How do we keep landlords accountable? Rising rents and economic factors in rent control and rental assistance, and also a equitable housing court. So kind of issues focused on landlord-tenant relations. And I think even with the governor and the whole pandemic, where the state governor came in and said you don't have to pay your rent, I think that's caused a lot of issues in the city's rental market. I think anytime you take away, a landlord, whether they're a homeowner and they live on property or they're an LLC, by telling landlords that, or tenants, that they don't have to pay their rent, that's kind of led to a problem. And we'll see at the end of the show, short-term rentals, how Airbnbs is kind of affecting the rental market. And homelessness and shelter solutions. So youth homelessness and the McKinney-Vento Act. I don't know what the McKinney-Vento Act, but also talking about shelter expansion and transitional housing. So I've noticed even too, our city has lots, rising homeless populations. I've seen homeless people living under highway overpasses here, even in the winter. And if you've ever been to the NFTA bus stop, the central stop in the downtown, it's essentially a de facto homeless shelter. It's kind of, I know I've been there, 10 o'clock at night later, just waiting for, a bus to take a bus. And, it's essentially a homeless shelter almost at the NFTA station. So, we have almost an emerging homelessness crisis, and also transitional housing. So people that maybe get out of, prison, how do we transition them back into housing, especially when they're facing, discrimination for potential criminal past. So housing development and repair. So how do we do infill housing, especially on vacant lots, was an issue. Tax credit for housing developers, reinvesting in existing homes and affordable housing supply, and then community land trusts were some of the issues brought up. And then access to services and government response. So access to, waiting lists, complex paperwork and financial education. And one of the clips we'll see later on is that the city just has so many complex and bureaucratic processes that make navigating, whether you can get government assistance or I'm sure if you're a property owner or you've ever had to pay a tax bill with the city, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If it's a mess to really just the citizens' experience of interfacing with the government is a real problem in the city because it's a pain. And then public assistance challenges. So those were kind of the buckets that the public commented out. And so that was the public comment summary of the task force report. So the task force report. So here's a nice cover page of it. So it was released in November 2023. Report. And if you go to muckrakerpunk.net, you can just click the AHTF report button and you can download the full report yourself if you like to read. It's I think a 29-page PDF. So you can read the full report. I'll do a brief summary and synopsis here. So this is the first, for important to understand, this is the first of two reports that will be proposed. So there's a second report that it said will be released in spring 2024. I think part of the reason they did that is because there was this end of the year coming up, and they wanted to get some sort of progress on their affordable housing report. So this November 2023 report, it includes all agreed upon proposals that relate to policies already on the books or otherwise not requiring major legislation to be passed. So this first report was really just looking at the kind of current regulations and things that wouldn't require, major legislative overhaul. So given the short timeline that the council members will have before the new year, the task force hopes that these proposals are attainable within their limited time. So the spring 2024 report will consist of, additional policy proposals, including those that may require more involved new legislation. So this was really on a timeline. They just wanted to get some sort of report out there that talked about things, small steps, small victories, that maybe some low hanging fruit or some easy wins that the council could get that won't require, major legislation. So a first thing that I'd like to get into for this report was their operating definition of affordability. So when you talk about affordable housing, there's really no definition. I mean, the kind of the standard U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development definition is 30% of income. So if you're a person, you take your monthly income and then you multiply that by 30%, and that's the amount that you should be spending on rent. So if you make $1,000 a month, you should be spending, $300 a month on housing. And so essentially your housing should be tied to how much income you make. So your total income for a month, you shouldn't be spending more than 30%. If you're spending more than 30%, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, your housing is unaffordable. Now this definition, it's okay. You kind of have to come up, planners need to come up with some sort of definition, but it's kind of also regarded as an insufficient method or measure because it's too narrow. So, for example, this standard does not account for student debt, inflation, stagnating wages in a housing market that has outpaced income. So affordability is very dependent on a renter's individual situation. So given this variability in the concept of affordability, the task force did not limit its research and recommendations, but used it as an invitation to consider all levels of affordability. So the task force, they decided to let tenants define affordability. So essentially, if you feel like your housing's unaffordable, it is. So I think this makes up a good point of just, your income multiplied by 30% isn't necessarily a good definition of affordable because if you have credit card debt, student loan debt, maybe it depends on how many children you have, maybe how many breadwinners are in the household. There's all types of things that go into whether housing is affordable or not. So I think that was a good definition, but I think that was a major point of contention. Now, I think I even went to the August meeting where everybody has a different definition of affordable housing. So the task force report presented 4 policy recommendations. So these are kind of the 4 areas that I'll get into deeper, but these are kind of the 4, you can think of them as almost pillars of the affordable housing task force, at least this first report. So they proposed 4 policy recommendations. So updating Buffalo's fair housing law, increasing limited liability company transparency, to fund and conduct a vacancy study, and fully implement the proactive rental inspection program. So there's our Muckraker alphabet, PRI, proactive rental inspection program. So those were the 4 pillars. So fair housing law, LLC transparency, a vacancy study, and increased PRI. So update the Buffalo's fair housing laws. That's the first pillar. So the task force recommended updating the definition of source of income to reflect common sources of income. So they recommended amending Buffalo Code Section 154.13 to include common sources of income such as security agreements. This will align with Buffalo's law with the more effective definition in the New York State Human Rights Law, which went into effect in 2019. So I think part of the report, it talks about how Buffalo's fair housing law, at one point in time, I think it was 2006 when Buffalo came up with their source of income or their fair housing law. It was really on the cutting edge. They were, one of the first states, one of the first cities in New York State. And we'll see that might popping up again later. The other was to modernize penalties. So to discourage discriminatory practices, they proposed revisions to Buffalo Code Section 154.2, 0. So these changes would reasonably increase penalties for fair housing violations. Recommended penalties would vary based on the number of rental units owned and ensuring the larger landlords face appropriate consequences for violations. So the penalties that the Common Council established in 2006 are outdated and inadequate for fair housing enforcement. So I believe that the rates, so essentially the rates that were set in 2006 have not gone up or have not been adjusted. So with inflation and whatnot, the rates for, penalties have not gone up. So they recommended modernizing those penalties. So I think there's different rates too based on if it's a one unit rental, 5 unit rental. And the other thing, so the code section, so the city is governed by essentially 2 documents. There's our code and then the charter. So the code is kind of the rules. I'll get into that different, but those are kind of the 2 documents. And the city code kind of outlines the different things, but these basically to change the charter, it's much more involved. So the code is something that's accessible. So these are kind of things that the Common Council could do in the short term that wouldn't be as hard. So the other thing they recommended in updating the fair housing law was dedicating more resources to fair housing enforcement. So recognizing the importance of better enforcing existing laws, they recommended dedicating more resources to fair housing enforcement. So this includes additional funding to increase the number of city employees responsible for investigating and prosecuting fair housing complaints. So essentially you recommended just having more fair housing enforcement. So the city is really understaffed. I know, for example, in just the inspections department, each inspector is responsible for multiple census tracts, which is thousands of houses. And fair housing office, I don't even know how many resources are kind of devoted to just fair housing in the city side. But they essentially said the city needs to put more resources into the enforcement of fair housing. So the second pillar, so that was the fair housing law. The second pillar was increasing limited liability company transparency, so LLCs. So they recommended requiring LLC ownership disclosure on the rental registry form. So the council should require limited liability companies, LLCs, to disclose the name, residential address, and business address for every member with a 10% or greater interest in the LLC. This measure falls within the city's home rule authority, and it will enable officials to get in touch with owners when necessary. So essentially in New York State, this home rule you'll see is essentially each municipality has rule over, I guess, their home or their individual municipality. So the city of Buffalo has certain authorities just within the city of Buffalo. So this is an issue with LLC, and I think we all probably understand that there's a difference in rental properties between, someone that, lives in the lower and has a tenant upstairs versus, an LLC where no one in the LLC is transparent and maybe they live down in New York City or in Abu Dhabi or Japan and, they're absent and nobody knows. So there's kind of a difference between LLCs, which are just companies, and, a mom and pop landlord, which is kind of one of the issues when you get into rental housing is it's so complex. It's not, black or white. So the second is create a user-friendly ownership portal. So tenants must be able to contact their landlords for needed repairs, communications about rental payments, and more. We recommend creating a user-friendly public web portal to make this possible and to increase property transparency throughout the city. This portal would offer ownership information for rental properties, including LLC ownership details. To protect owners' privacy, only business addresses, not residential ones, would be included. So essentially, they're recommending some sort of portal or web portal that would make transparency in LLC. So I think if we have these LLCs that own properties in the city, it would be helpful to, especially ones that might be trouble properties, to be able to track down their owners and kind of the responsible parties for those properties. So that was kind of the second pillar, was the LLCs. The third pillar was to fund and conduct a vacancy study. So fully fund a vacancy study and hire a consultant to conduct it. So it's basically saying the city should look into hiring a consultant to perform a study according to best practices outlined in this report. So So essentially, they're asking for the city to hire a consultant or someone to study the issue of vacancy. So how many vacant units, and kind of getting our minds around, the current situation in Buffalo's affordable housing. I agree it's good to be informed, but I also I'm kind of skeptical of government consultants, especially given my experience with the city's SAS contract, how effective a consultant would be in researching the study. I think we have plenty of research groups here locally, and this is kind of coming back into public participation. If the Common Council was open to collaborating with the public and community researchers, I think we could do a vacancy study, especially given data on the open data portal. We have an assessment role. We have the tax rolls. We could do some information, some research, and some analytics on it. But the Common Council doesn't really. They'll hire some consultant with credentials to do it. So that was the other thing, is a vacant study. And then the fourth pillar was fully implement the proactive rental inspection program. So again, here's the PRI, this Muckraker's alphabet. So fully fund the PRI program. So the Common Council should fully fund the proactive rental inspections for the next fiscal year, codify a PRI implementation timeline, upgrade technology for inspectors, amend the law to include owner-occupied doubles. So recognizing the need to ensure safe, healthy housing in owner-occupied double units, they recommend amending the PRI law to include rental units in these properties. This adjustment will ensure that tenants in owner-occupied doubles have access to the same housing standards as those investor-owned units. So I guess right now the law must not include like the mom and pop or someone that owns the property but also has a tenant on site. And then empower inspectors to enforce the law. So we recommend amending City Code Chapter 137 to include necessary fines for the Department of Permits and Inspections to effectively enforce housing regulations. These fines are essential to encourage compliance in housing standards. So kind of coming back to the main problem, which is the city can't proactively inspect rentals. They're more responsive that if they get a call for a problem, then they'll go out and inspect it. But there's no real way that they can proactively inspect rentals, because right now they kind of have this legacy system where each inspector is like responsible for, like, as I said, like a census tract, which is a couple thousand houses. So upgrading technology too. I mean, a lot of the inspectors, especially my experience at City Hall, a lot of the inspectors can't actually use technology. And actually the first use of the city's SAS contract, so the SAS Institute, they developed a use of, in addition to developing a use of a force dashboard for the police department, they developed a couple dashboards for the Department of Permit and Inspections, which have not been made public, that was kind of aimed in this area of like helping inspectors almost use analytics to kind of see which problem properties, what properties would be a problem before they became problems. So this has kind of been an issue too in the city. So that's kind of a very high level overview of the Affordable Housing Task Force. So in summary, really there are 4 policy recommendations, and we'll get into this now of the Common Council's actions. So the main takeaway is that this task force came up with 4 policy recommendations. So updating the Buffalo's Fair Housing Law, increasing LLC transparency, conducting a vacancy study, and implementing proactive rental inspections. So those were the 4 policy proposals that came out of this, year-long task force process. And we thank the task force members. I know some of them personally. Thank you for your service and, spending your time not getting paid a nickel to come up with a report. So that's kind of the task force side. So then the next is BASH. So we'll go back to our Muckraker's alphabet of BASH, the Buffalo Affordable and Safe Housing. So once the Affordable Housing Task Force came up with these policy recommendations, the council then set up this thing called BASH, which is the Buffalo Affordable and Safe Housing Initiative. So there's 4 items. Essentially, they made an item for each policy proposal of the task force. So item 2133 through 2136. So as we can see, each of those policies got their own item. And this item, the report was released in November, And then this item came before the Common Council in December. So December 12th, here's the adaptation of these council, the council items.
Item number 54, BASH, Buffalo Affordable Safe Housing Initiative 1.
Motion to send to legislation, items 54 through 57.
Second by Council Member Nowakowski. And council members, just these are the initiatives that our task force brought to us in their first report. There will be more reports coming. The task force was concerned about having another sponsor added to this, so that when I leave after the next meeting, that these initiatives will still be on the books for us to consider. So, does somebody like to co-sponsor? Councilmember Wyatt.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. So those remain.
Item number 58, excuse Councilmember Wingo from full council meeting December 12th.
Motion.
So that was outgoing council member Darius Pridgeon. So essentially, as you saw him there, he was just saying that the task force is concerned. His term just expired at the end of the year, so they were concerned that their policy items wouldn't be considered moving forward. So they essentially at the end of the year put these policy items on so that the new Common Council in January, they'd still be there. So that was last December. So then a couple weeks ago, the Affordable Housing Task Force, they have this Facebook page. They put in their Facebook post. Essentially, they said that, the items, so these policy items were going to be, on the Common Council agenda for the public to speak on. So they said about, canceled. We were just alerted by council staff that the decision was made by the council members not to open this item to the public at this time. So for some reason, the Common Council, it just said the public will not be able to comment on these policy proposals now that they're before us. So this was the January 16th Common Council chamber meetings. So here's the January 16th meeting. So the items for BASH, we're going to see a clip here. So items 16, 17, 18, and 19 are the 4 BASH items that came before the council on January 16th.
Several items to remove from the table and open for discussion. Items number 5, 6, 8, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21, 28, 29, 35, and 58.
Seconded by Council Member Golombek.
Item 5, special use 420 Grant Street for cannabis establishment.
So yeah, that was the BASH discussion in the Common Council chamber. So they kind of put those 4 items that the task force spent a year studying into, as you saw there, just a bunch of items that they essentially removed from the agenda. So essentially those items, as soon as the new Common Council got before, and that was Leah Halton Pope, the new Ellicott District Council member that replaced Darius Pridgeon. So they essentially just removed those items from the Common Council agenda. So then let's watch the 23rd meeting. So then the next week, they did come up with some more. So let's tune into this clip from the 23rd meeting.
Item number 107, BASH for Buffalo Affordable and Safe Housing Initiative 1.
Motion to receive and file items 107 through 110.
Second by Councilmember Golombek.
Item number 111, Special Use 726 Linwood.
So that was the BASH discussion where they were. So essentially, this legislation meeting on the 16th, they removed it from the agenda. So they removed the 4 items from the legislation agenda. That went to the Common Council. So then the next week, the 23rd, there, you saw they just received and filed the items. So they essentially just got rid of those 4 policy proposals and moved them off the agenda. So then that same day, the Affordable Housing Task Force, they provided an explanation of what was going on. So they said, canceled. We just heard from council staff that the council members are no longer opening the AHTF-related resolution items up to the public to speak on Tuesday the 16th. So the explanation from the council staff. The council has opted for a more direct approach to achieve the goals of these resolutions. This plan excludes having a public comment opportunity on Tuesday. This new approach aims to be more direct, facilitating informed and timely implementation of necessary changes. It's important to note that there is nothing that mandates public comment on these resolutions. So, the Common Council essentially said, we're not going to talk to the public. We got this. We're going to do a more direct approach. So really, then the Common Council. So what was their direct approach? So that's kind of the next part. So they came up with a couple new items. So the first one was 24-148, which they added members to the Affordable Housing Task Force. So I think in this item, they essentially said that, I think it was the Fair Housing or one of the city representatives was no longer needed on the council, and they're going to put a new community member on. But that wasn't really the major one. They really came up with two new items. So they got rid of the 4 policy proposals of the task force and then came up with these 2 new items to do a more direct approach. So the BASH initiative report requests. So the Common Council set up this. So in this item, I'll read it. So whereas the Affordable Housing Task Force submitted a report on November 14th, the additional information pieces are required before implementing these thoughtful recommendations. So therefore, let it be resolved that the City of Buffalo Common Council hereby requests the Department of Admin and Finance to conduct analysis on the potential outcomes if the Buffalo Office of Fair Housing were to recruit 5 full-time staff members. Request that the Department of Admin and Finance conduct an analysis on the potential outcomes of funding comprehensive citywide vacancy studies by an independent third party to be modeled after Kingston and Rochester and other cities that did similar studies. Request the Department of Permanent Inspections to conduct an analysis on the potential outcomes and compile and submit a detailed report outlining all necessary resources, strategies, technologies, and procedural improvements required for the department to successfully conduct 6,000 PRI inspections annually over the next 6 years. Request that the management information systems conduct an analysis on the potential outcomes of developing a user-friendly, publicly accessible web portal with comprehensive ownership information. And then require each of these reports to incorporate analysis pertaining to the associated costs, staff time, and necessary resources for implementing these changes. So they direct the city departments to collaborate with one another in the production of these reports, and they direct that a report be submitted to the Common Council by March 6, 2024. And then they directed the clerk to send a copy of this resolution. So essentially, as you can see, they took some of the items in the Affordable Housing Task Force report, and then they essentially just divvied it up to their departments to say, kind of do an analysis and get back to us in a month. So I don't understand why the public was taking it out of this, why the council said we're not going to let the public comment on these policies. But we'll see. So March 6th is the best date. So I guess I'll file along and we'll all file along that if at March 6, 2024, do we get any of these reports, or is this something that's just going to slowly go away because people aren't paying attention? The second initiative was the BASH initiative, immediate actions and directives. So this item, I'll read a brief summary of it. So request that the Corporation Council update the definition of source of income in Buffalo City Code section 154.13. So to align with New York State human rights law, incorporating specific language to reflect this change. So the term lawful source of income shall include but not be limited to child support, alimony, foster care subsidies, income derived from Social Security, or any form of federal, state, or local public assistance or housing assistance, including but not limited to Section 8 vouchers or any other form of housing assistance or credit, whether or not such income or credit is paid or attributed directly to a landlord, and any other forms of lawful income. So essentially, they're asking the city's legal department to draft up a new code that won't allow people to discriminate against people based on their source of income. And then they request that the Corporation Council revise Section 154.20 of the Buffalo City Code to enact the following increased penalties. So again, we talked about that the city's fines haven't been updated since 2006. So they're saying that 1 to 4 unit, $2,500 per fair housing violation, a 5 to 50 unit, $5,000 per fair housing violation, and then 50 or more units, $10,000 per fair housing violation. And then they also requested the Corporation Council revise City Code 26.4.4, mandating that limited liability companies disclose to the city the name, address of all members holding a 10% or greater interest in the LLC. And then they also directed the Corporation Council to file an ordinance amendment to include 2 family owner occupied properties as part of the PRI program, and to work with council staff and Department of Public Works to amend City Code Chapter 137 to include the following as Class E fines. So failure to respond to notices required by the department, renting property without a valid certificate of rental compliance, and failure to clear lead hazard in a specified time. So essentially, they're requesting the city, the corporation council to kind of draft up some city code amendments. So they did take some of the recommendations of the task force and get the ball moving on potentially adding that to the city code. So those were kind of the two items that the council, I guess this is their more direct approach. So let's see them adopt these items.
Item 10, Buffalo Affordable and Safe Housing Initiative, report requests.
Motion to table items 10 and 11.
Seconded by Councilmember Wyatt.
Motion to remove the following item.
So they just tabled that item, which I don't know. I don't know necessarily what that means. I don't know if that means essentially we're gonna have to keep our eye on it to see if anything happens, because my understanding is that when they table an item, it just kind of goes away. So we'll still be on the agenda, but those items are tabled in the legislative committee. So I don't know if they'll appear on a future agenda. I'm sure we'll see them pop up again, especially as we approach that March 6th deadline. But something we'll have to monitor is if these changes get added to the city code. So that's kind of the full scope of AHTF to the BASH analysis, and that was the council member meeting today. Another item of interest that's not directly related to the housing task force, but the council did draft up an ordinance amendment. So the ordinance amendment is making a big legislative change focused on short-term rentals, so STRs. So the ordinance amendment, so essentially it was the city's trying to figure out a way how do we regulate Airbnbs, because the issue that the city is running into, and some of you may know if you live in the city, of essentially Airbnbs are taking over a lot of the housing units in the city. So instead of renting it to someone that lives in the city, lots of people from small individuals to corporations are buying properties and then just renting them out as Airbnbs. And that's decreasing the supply of our housing stock. If we have a limited amount of houses, and I think the estimate is over 1,000 units are being used just for Airbnbs, that decreases the supply that can be used as housing for Buffalonians and citizens. So let's tune in to today's legislation committee where they talked about this ordinance amendment for short-term rentals.
These are the costs of other business licenses in the city of Buffalo. Snow removal license, $75. Restaurant license, $200. Food store license, $250. Tax license, $50. Lodging license for 25 plus beds, $150. The proposed short-term rental license, $1,000. $1,000 to run a small 2-unit short-term rental is 6 to 7 times the cost of a lodging license with 25 beds. This is a very expensive cost and a large burden on a small business owner, and it could take months to recoup that cost. Short-term rental investing gives us the ability to take eyesore houses that no one wants and make them beautiful again. My short-term rental on Ashland was vacant for several years. I listed it for sale. No one wanted to buy it. I ended up buying it and putting a substantial rehab in it in order to make it a short-term rental, and I could never have done it if I had to rent it out long-term. Short-term rentals make affordable options for families and groups that can't afford hotels. Many of our guests are large families that come to Buffalo and could not have afforded to stay at several hotel rooms. We hosted a swim team. We've hosted other volleyball teams and many other visitors.
So let's skip ahead to another public comment. This is the same meeting, just a different public person speaking.
And I have lived on Dates Park in Allentown for a very long time. Our family and our grown children are committed to living and working in Buffalo. Yet my son and his fiance can't do this. As first-time home buyers, they can't afford to buy a house in the city. One of the reasons is the proliferation of short-term rentals. This is just one of the many reasons I support this legislation. I am pleased as a homeowner, a taxpayer, and a voter that the Common Council is taking the detrimental effects of STR seriously. Short-term rentals turn what was once a home into an unregulated hotel without security, parking, on-site management, and public revenue from commercial and hotel taxes. Buffalo's affordable housing crisis is real, and short-term rentals add to it. The biggest potential cost imposed comes in the form of higher housing costs for city residents. This is from the Economic Policy Institute.
Let's skip ahead to another comment in the same meeting.
Good afternoon, another afternoon in Common Council. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hold my temperament right now because when I hear somebody say that 1,500 to 2,000 units wouldn't make a difference in our housing crisis, that's very disturbing to me when you consider what the condition of our city is. All I want to say about this situation is that when I look at a small community like mine that already has almost a dozen Airbnbs within 7, 8 streets, I think that we have to be very careful. There are some things that we have let run amok and we have not been ahead of. You know, I sat in Common Council not too long ago when I heard some residents coming in asking for a noise ordinance because the noise from the bars from the Elmwood Strip. And I'm like, why wouldn't you do that before? It's
So I think that gives kind of a good synopsis of essentially the public discussion really was two-sided. It was either you were pro Airbnbs and, you know, you have Airbnbs and they're great, or the other side was really the residents, you know, speaking out of how it's affecting the housing stock. So let's see Council President Chris Scanlon, his comments in the same
to
meeting.
everyone that's paying attention that there's a tremendous cost to the city of Buffalo to process even one of these applications. You're talking about a 6, 7, 8, sometimes up to 10-step process. In addition to that, there's a monitoring system that we have to pay $20,000 a year for because there's so many applications for these, so many people operating them illegally that we're trying to keep track of who's on the different platforms. So there's a tremendous amount of cost to the city of Buffalo. And I agree with Councilmember Rivera that I typically am, you know, let's let the market figure it out. Whatever the market dictates, that's fine. We just got to make sure that we're doing it within parameters that don't hurt any residents physically, make sure everything is safe for them and doesn't hurt the city financially.
So I think President
All right. With
Scanlon,
that,
his comments,
we will be
he's
ta-
basically essentially just trying to bring up, I think it's right too, of every time there's an Airbnb and there's a problem there. So say, you know, an LLC in New York City has an Airbnb and they rent it out, and that people that are renting it out have a huge party and the police need to respond. Well, those police, you know, are being paid for by our taxpayer dollars. So the city is incurring costs from Airbnbs, but also they're not really regulating them. So it's an issue that's then affecting the affordable housing. So I looked at AirDNA, which is, you know, a data analytics site focused on Airbnbs. So basically they had just on the Buffalo Niagara area, it's not just the city, but kind of the whole metro area, not the whole metro, but little parts of Cheektowaga and Amherst. Just over 1,300 available listings. So 71% of short-term rentals are on Airbnb, 7% are on VRBO, VRBO, I've never heard of that, and 22% are on both. So the average daily rate is $180 a night, and annual revenue, and I couldn't really understand what the annual revenue meant, if that meant each unit, but $34,000 was the annual revenue in the city of Buffalo. So that's kind of the overview of the affordable housing. So from the task force to the bash to then, you know, today's discussion. So I hope that can help bring everybody up to speed on kind of the current state of affordable housing. These items are still in the legislation, at least those two. So I encourage you to reach out to your council members if you have any concerns, or, you know, if there's something about affordable housing. This is an issue that's not going away, hasn't gone away, and is still a problem that we all need to kind of address to. So that's the affordable housing. So now as we kind of approach the end of the podcast or my therapy session, I'd like to make an announcement of I have released the raw footage from my mental health behavioral health unit visit. So on Christmas Eve last year, 3 members of the City of Buffalo's Police Behavioral Health Unit visited my house. And now if you go to muckrakerpunk.net/Christmas, you can see the whole security footage. So here's some brief clips of the you know, the police's behavioral health unit checking on my mental health on Christmas Eve. They walked up on me. I was repairing the light bulb or the rear tail light on my parents' vehicle and detailing their car as a Christmas gift, and they just kind of showed up at my house. And yeah, unfortunately the video doesn't have sound. But I think I'd just like to put the raw footage out there so you can kind of make your own judgment of what happened. But that's the full clip of my Christmas Eve surprise. So muckrakerpunk.net/Christmas, and you can watch the full footage, unedited and raw audit of the City of Buffalo's Police Behavioral Health Unit. So also as part of this, so the December 24th, they came to my house and interviewed me. I think it's important that I bring up that on December 12th, I filed an item with the Common Council. So here's the Common Council 12 days before my mental health visit, addressing my item.
Miscellaneous, item number 44, local 650 refund check for union dues during provisional employment.
Motion to receive and file items 44 and 45.
Second by Councilmember White.
Item number 46, next.
So the Common Council, they received and filed my item 12 days before I was visited for my mental health concerns. So agenda item 232125. So M. Austin, local 650 refund checked for union dues during provisional employment and open data. So I filed an item with the Common Council 12 days before the police showed up at my house to check on my mental health for escalating behaviors. So in this item, I sent this item on December 6th to the Common Council, basically just making them aware that local 650 issued me a refund check for union dues. So essentially the city was stealing my wages while I was working for the city. They were deducting money from my paycheck without my permission, which I discovered. So I just gave them some high level facts about my employment in open data, including who my direct supervisor was and whatnot. And then just some of the, a couple other items related to this. So that was my item. Essentially, my big question as part of this item was asking the Common Council, how many refund checks are owed to terminated provisional employees that were paying dues to local 650 without an authorization form? So essentially, the collective bargaining agreement of the City of Buffalo, between the City of Buffalo and the local AFS-CMA or CME union, says that members of the union have to authorize the controller. So they have to authorize the city that is okay to take dues out of their paycheck. And the comptroller's office was deducting money out of my paycheck without my permission, which I figured that out, and I guess they didn't appreciate that I did. And I think that I'm not the only one. So I don't think they ask anybody's permission. I think they just take people's union dues without their permission, which would be, systemically stealing wages of provisional city employees. So that is my item. So I believe that, they came to my house as, because they weren't liking what my audit work was turning up. But I guess I'm just speculating, but that's just kind of my gut feeling on it, is if they were kind of trying to just intimidate me to get me to stop asking questions, because I think they're stealing not just my wages, but I think they're doing it systemically. So as we round the turn on the little bit of this episode, I want to do a rewind to May 7th through May 9th, 1977. A great time in Americana history. But the Grateful Dead, they played a legendary 3 concert set. So they started on the 7th in Boston, Massachusetts, then went to Barden Hall in Ithaca at Cornell University, and then the 9th day, or on May 9th, they played a show in Buffalo. So the Barden Hall show, the May 8th, is for Deadheads, is considered one of the iconic Grateful Dead shows. But the show the next night in Buffalo is the same type of vibes, but not really that. It's just not that. It's not as in the folklore that hyped up. But I want to, as we leave, play a song called "Ship of Fools" by Grateful Dead. So part of the lyrics go, "I won't slave for beggars' pay, likewise gold and jewels, but I would slave to learn the way to sink your ship of fools. Ship of fools on a cruel sea, ship of fools sail away from me." So here's on my YouTube channel. I've also been uploading, just songs from the Buffalo show. So here's "Ship of Fools," Grateful Dead, live at Buffalo Memorial Auditorium, May 9th, 1977. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you for tuning in and learning about affordable housing.
I won't stay for beggars' pay, likewise gold and jewels, but I want to slave to learn the way will see.